Hey, got another verse for you. Actually, three verses. We're starting in 1 Samuel 15, and I'm also going to reference a couple other verses in Ecclesiastes and Hosea that kind of go hand in hand very beautifully with this one verse. So while you're turning to 1 Samuel 15, to give you a quick rundown, this is taking place right after Saul, king of Israel, has led these people against the Amalekites. And he's been instructed by God through the prophet Samuel, wipe them out. Kill every man, every woman, every child, destroy all their livestock, property, everything. Devote them to destruction, make it as though they never existed. Don't leave anything behind. And so, after the battle's over, the people of Israel start taking some of the best of the spoil and making a sacrifice to God. And Saul doesn't see a problem with this, so he just lets it go. But then Samuel shows up on the scene and looks at Saul and is like, "Yo, fool, what you think you're doing?" And Saul's just kind of like, whoa, chill. I'm just letting the people make a sacrifice to the Lord. And so Samuel's like, no, boy, that's not what you were told to do. That's not what's important here. And so in verse 22, in chapter 15, Samuel says to Saul, "Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams." He's getting very blunt with Saul here, telling him, look, God doesn't give a crap about sacrifices. He cares about the heart. He cares about you being obedient to his voice. Because very simply, if you have your heart aligned with God, if your will and his will match up, then you're going to take the same actions God would. And in instances like this, when there seems to be some confusion, God's telling you very clearly, this is what I want you to do. Destroy the Amalekites. And if you would have done this, you would have done what was God's will, and you would have led the people of Israel as a whole into God's desire for them. And that's what you're supposed to do as king, is to lead the people to God. They're supposed to follow you as you follow me, essentially, is that concept. And Samuel is just kind of dumbfounded that Saul just doesn't get this, and so he's making this very clear to him. And now I'm going to go ahead and jump over real quick over to Ecclesiastes 5. Chapter 5, verse 1 says, "Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil." I mean, that's pretty heavy. I mean, the second half of that verse is what stuck out to me and reminded me of this story, is that the sacrifice of fools, they don't even realize what they're doing is wrong in the first place. And Saul didn't seem to see the issue with this. I mean, it's not like they're taking spoil from the Amalekites for themselves. They're taking some of the best of the flocks from the Amalekites, making a sacrifice to God, which seems like the proper religious thing to do. Hey, we're not going to take it for ourselves, but we'll sacrifice it to God. I mean, when you think about it, that seems right, until you think about what a sacrifice is in the first place. The sacrifice is giving up something of yourself. It's rendering something of cost and of value to you to another. In the instance of taking a sheep or a bull or a goat and sacrificing it to God, the people of Israel were typically taking something from their own flock. And unless you were like Solomon or somebody else super rich, you probably didn't have thousands upon thousands of sheep and thousands upon thousands of goats and bulls and all that. you probably had just a few dozen, if that. And when you take one sheep out of a group of like 2,000, it won't be noticed. But when you take one sheep out of a flock of 2 dozen, that's going to be noticed. That's a much larger percentage of what you have. It's a greater sacrifice. It reminds me of the parable Jesus told. I don't remember exactly which gospel it's in, but Jesus was talking about the one woman who brought in, like, I don't remember if it was 1 or 2 coins of, like, the lowest denomination of value in Israel at the time, because that's literally all she had. She put that in the offering bucket, and Jesus said that is worth more than the bags of money that the Pharisees bring in out of the abundance of their wealth. It's not about the amount you give or what you give. It's about, more so about the heart behind it, and again, less about the amount and more about the percentage, I guess. It's about where your heart's at. If you give out of your abundance, okay, cool, but if you give when you have nothing left to give, that means so much more. If a millionaire buys you dinner, it's not going to mean as much as if your neighbor who just lost his job takes you out to dinner, because you know he's more hard-pressed for money. So by him taking you out to dinner, it seems more important, it seems more genuine than a millionaire taking you out for lunch. But hey, free food is free food, so I'd be happy either way. But I would note that it would mean more coming from the dude who's broke. And that's just what that is. A sacrifice is giving something of yourself. And the people of Israel, very simply, were not supposed to have any of the Amalekite stuff in the first place. If the people of Israel would have destroyed all the Amalekite stuff as they were supposed to, God never mentioned anything about a sacrifice. He wasn't expecting a sacrifice from them. But they just gave one to him out of the Amalekite stuff instead of destroying it like he told them. So first of all, they disobey God and give him something that he doesn't expect, that he doesn't want under these circumstances. And that's infuriating to God, as Samuel makes very clear. Because as you read in Hosea 6:6, God says through the prophet Hosea, "For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." God would rather that you know who he is, that you know his heart, that you understand what he wants from you, steadfast love, not sacrifice, and that in this context, out of love for him, you would obey him rather than disobey him and make a sacrifice to him. He would rather you come in and sit quietly in his presence, as it says in Ecclesiastes 5:1. He'd rather have you come in and sit quietly in his presence and just listen. Because if you're really listening to his voice, you're going to hear him speak. And if you hear him speak, hopefully, if your heart is in line with him and you truly love him steadfastly, as it says in Hosea 6:6, if you're listening and you... Sorry, that was kind of distracting. If you listen to him, get into his presence, and you truly listen, and he speaks, and your heart's lined up with him, he's going to speak. And if you really truly love God, you're going to obey what he has to say, and not be like Saul running off, disobeying him, and doing what you think is right. Because if you really get quiet and listen to God, you'll hear God. You won't have to guess about whether or not you heard from God. You'll know you heard God. And you won't have to go with what you think is the right thing to do. So, that's all I got to share for you guys. Hope there's something good in there that you could really take away, and that was awesome. So, thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.